I have quite a few cameras out right now. I hesitate to say the number because I don't want people to think.
Oh, we won't judge you because we're probably in the same boat.
Yeah.
And we're back.
Hey.
Because we did one this morning, episode 49.
You didn't eat anything, man. Are you okay? Are you going to be okay?
Yeah, I'm all right right now. I'm going to be hangry by the end.
Yeah, let me finish. I was telling you, I lost 10 pounds since October 25th.
Weight Watchers will do that.
No, deer hunting will do that.
Oh, is that stress?
I've been
or
watching
just
anything.
grinding?
Just grinding. And
well, you usually eat multiple portions.
I haven't eaten any. Yeah, I have eaten a little less being in the stand, but I haven't worked out.
I know. I've been like just eating oatmeal cream pies every day.
Yeah, a lot of cream pies. A lot of cream pies and granola and turkey and stuff. But dude, I've noticed it too. When I got back in the gym there a day or two ago, I was just like winded.
Yeah.
Like, just felt like I was going to throw up from exhaustion.
I know. Yeah, that's what I was like. Yeah, I mean, when you're in the stand and you're just like, although we had a pretty good sandwich route there in Illinois for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
it was very solid.
And pizza.
Yeah, it's not for lack of eating. We ate a lot. It just
going.
Yeah, just going through us.
Rutting.
Yeah,
that's what happens when you're rutting.
Left a lot of unturned logs there in Illinois.
Yeah, you said that you almost felt
it was weird going inside.
Yeah, you're like, can I just poop outside? You're like, is this better?
What is this porcelain utensil here?
It's warm, and what is this, like toilet paper on a roll?
I think Colton went once. Did you even go to the bathroom in Illinois?
Yeah, probably at the sandwich shop.
Maybe when I would like get down on the stand and walk away, he would just lean out over.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know where you're going. I'm just going to drop it right here. You're like, I can't believe we're not seeing any deer here. Oh, man. Well, it's we're approaching Christmas, I assume, when this is dropping. I don't know how close to Christmas, but we're for sure out of the rut unless you're listening in the South. So we're talking, postseason food sources, late season. The grind is still, and if you're holding tags, like we're getting down there. At this point, you gotta be real honed in on that food source.
Not that down there though. Like I know you're stressed out about it, but
I'm stressed out, and it's November 23rd. It's not even Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you've got time. Oh yeah, I guess by the time this airs, you're getting.
If I'm holding tags, well, again, we talked about it with Ben. I'm excited for the future of. I've got more land in Kentucky to work next year. I've got a new place in Ohio to work next year. So I'm excited. I'm as excited to get into that stuff as I am to finish this season strong. So
I'm getting there too. After some recent trail camera information, I'm getting excited about some shed hunting.
And I mean, this guy's today is gonna help us with a lot of this stuff. But I think one thing that'll be interesting for you is like how much effort do you put into your home farm this year compared to what you have in years past?
Yes. For sure. That, and we've had some interesting conversations with like Craig Harper about the pasture restoration and stuff. And so I really want to now circle back with Jeff and we don't have to spend a bunch of time on that, but I'm curious what his thoughts are on that.
So guest this week is Jeff Sturgis. We've had him on before. Obviously, we're going to talk hunting with Jeff, see how his season's playing out. But really, as we start to transition out of the rut and into this late season, food sources become critical in locating deer and, subsequently harvesting a deer. And so I know Jeff being from Minnesota and hunting Wisconsin, like he's almost already zoned in on a lot of these late season food sources. So I think this information, if you are holding tags, is going to be critical to trying to punch those things here before the clock runs out.
Yeah. And this is the time, or I guess a couple weeks, but even before this airs is when it starts to happen is, the work that we've put in during the summer is like now is when you're grateful that you
Well, it's funny because you and I talked about that. I was like, man, it seems like, I've put all this work in the summer and early fall, and it's like, they're on acorns, they're over here, they're rutting in this thicket. And it's like, man, what about like all these food plots and everything else?
It's almost
that
a nice
done?
little surprise. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I planted all those brassica food plots.
There they are.
Here they are.
Here they come. So let's pull Jeff in and get this train rolling. There he is.
Hey guys.
What's up, man?
Not too much.
Short and sweet this time.
Yeah, we're diving right into this thing. Well, I mean, so Jeff, we kind of preluded this. I think this will air approaching. It's probably mid-December, approaching Christmas. So, obviously it's the end of November here that we're having this conversation. But especially with where you're at in Minnesota and hunting Wisconsin, your focus is starting to trend out to these food sources already. You know, where a lot of guys are still thinking rutting deer, maybe thickets, doe bedding. You're starting to lean towards this late season food source.
Yeah, and with that, it's kind of interesting. It's our around here the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th of November, southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, even into southern Michigan, and over about that level elevation, there's it really seems like the rut winds down crazy, and then all of a sudden there's little random flurries here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But right now it's like that dead period, and it seems like bucks are they need to replenish all the body fat they lost, their energy reserves, and so they're hitting food sources and they're just laying around all day. So it can seem dead.
Yeah.
Almost to me, this is more dead than like the October lull period or early October when they're just really not doing much. They're trying to recuperate and recover. They're just sitting around doing not much. But we get some outstanding second rut where some of those fawns or mid-snows, that's that early December time. And it seems like the further north you are, the more defined that is. Obviously down in the south, when's the second rut? I mean, there's like a first, second, third, fourth.
It trickles.
Yeah. We're up here. If, it's really defined where we get some great hunting. I think it's one of the most missed times in the whitetail woods in that, early December, end of November.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hunting food sources right now, but I'm also watching all our mock scrapes. I have quite a few cameras out right now. I hesitate to say the number because I don't want people to think.
We won't judge you because we're probably in the same boat.
Yeah.
I'm too spoiled, but I do have 24 cell cameras out, and then I have probably 25 regular cameras, and that's for 2 states.
Yeah.
And so when you see those pictures, most of them are on mock scrapes, and they're just not hitting the scrapes right now, but they will in the next week, or all of a sudden they'll start hitting them. And then that's when the second rut's on. And boy, that's some incredible opportunities. So I'm focusing on a lot on evening right now for food sources.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting in spots where I won't spook the deer. We have all our, we have, whether I'm using a shotgun, muzzleloader, or rifle, depending on the state. And then that'll transition. I will hunt some mornings here pretty soon. Seems like we have some good morning hunting with wet snow, good snows like that. And then also when the second rut hits. So I'll hit some mornings then too.
So that's what I was going to ask you, Jeff. So you're almost at this time, I won't say like stopping, but almost pausing on a lot of morning hunts and just focusing on that afternoon food source type hunts until you see some sort of trigger that says, okay, we're about to get a little bit of rut action here in the second bump.
Yeah. And part of it's too, because it seems like the bucks kind of go back home right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Wisconsin, we're hunting 30 acres, and there might be one on that property. I'm going to go there, sit tonight. And it's one of those, I can, no harm, no foul. I can go watch hidden food source, and I'm not going to spook anything going in and out. But if I went in there in the morning and let's say there was one on there, there's a good chance I'll spook him out because he's already there. He's not wandering around. He's not making rubs, scrapes. He's not cruising. So if I get in close to a bedding area and spook him, well, then I certainly don't have the good evening set. So right now, those evening sets are priority. And, but as soon as they're scraping and as soon as they're rutting, I'll be back in the morning. And even Wisconsin, it opened on Saturday. I sat all day in a stand by a bedding area, and I didn't go out the second morning just because there's no rutting going on.
Yeah.
If I go back, and so we watched food sources in the evening, and it helps because I can be over here in Minnesota too. It just depends on, what kind of sign we're seeing and what buck is where.
Is there a date range, Jeff, that you're kind of clinging to for those, or is it just purely observational that you're like, it's really dying down here, this must be this recouping period?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of it's observational, but at the same time, you can expect it around the 1st of December every year in our area. Where
how about the die off though? Like of
even
before, because I know there's guys. My dad is one of them that will hunt hard all the way through from the time the rut starts to the very end of the season. He's like, they're rutting.
Yeah, and I look at it like around here. Again, when it gets into the 12th, 14th, 15th, there's so little activity.
Yeah,
and then that could translate. I know a lot of guys because I put out all kinds of rut casts on the YouTube channel, like rut forecasts. Helped with HuntWise develop their rut cast, but it's when you see it just drops off so fast. So I'll have guys right now from Kentucky, for example, they're saying, yeah, I'm not seeing much at all. It's really dead.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio, where we were seeing that a week ago.
Sure.
And so it seems like, Kansas to Kentucky, Tennessee, there might even still be some flurries left, like to the 28th of November, 26th, but boy, it's right around the corner. It's just about done. And then that pushes that second rut back too. Like that'd be more like mid-December. So like people that are watching this, if you're talking about it coming out mid-December, there's, depending on those states, you could say Southern Illinois, Southern Ohio, Kansas, Kentucky, West Virginia, even over into like North Carolina, you could have areas that they're having a great second rut, the 20th of December.
Yeah. I think
ours would be over by then.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is from a local farm or herd perspective, Jeff, and that I know one thing that we talked about this morning is that I expect here, probably starting even today or tomorrow through, let's say, the 3rd to 7th of December in Pennsylvania and Ohio particularly, and sometimes in Kentucky, but really Pennsylvania, Ohio is where you've got these extremely high doe populations. We're going to see a pretty strong rut activity here because of missed does that are now recycling. Not yet doe fawns, but really the missed does recycling in. And it's a weird time frame because not everybody sees it, especially if you've managed your herd or in that area that you've got a really tight buck to doe ratio. But in a lot of these places that is extremely skewed, you're going to see this big bump and you're going to be like, oh, what just happened? Is these does? No, they're missed does that are now recycling back through.
Yeah. And that's what I count on, some of those plus those fawns.
Yep.
So they cue off their mothers. I always refer to it because I've, whether it's daughters, wife, but you talk about there's a certain dominant female in the house and everyone follows with that every month. And you can actually, they talk about that in sports teams, volleyball team, women's basketball, where you could have a lot of women that monthly, that time of the month, it's a similar time frame for all of them.
Yeah, they sync out.
So those fawns, all of a sudden they're queuing off their mothers, and then that would come in 25 days later, 20, 30, whatever it is.
Yep.
And so you have the fawns, and then you have the does that were missed, and it's a really cool bump. And we were with HUNTcast and Rutcast, all that stuff. We were looking at a lot of the data from all the states. It's interesting. A lot of them don't consider a second rut.
Yeah.
So they'll show a bell curve of the primary rut, and it almost shows later than it should be, like 2 weeks, because it's considering some of that second rut bump.
It's trying to find that average together versus two truly,
which is really the case.
Bell
but
curves.
It's just not showing that die off in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's showing like one giant bell curve instead of a big
100%.
one and then a little one. And then last year I saw a rutting buck that would have been that exact same time frame in early January. So it was, that third rut, and he was a 5-year-old. He was breaking branches and making scrapes and chasing does. He was so worked up, and it was snow on the ground, and I missed him. So it was, I'll admit that. I had a bunch of mishaps in Wisconsin, so I'm a Wisconsin tag for a long time last year, all the way to the end of January. So
it's funny because you say that, and so in that fawn cycle, a lot of it talks about that critical weight threshold, which I forget what it is. It's like 65 pounds or something like that, where that doe fawn hits that 65-pound mark, and essentially on average, she then becomes the ability to be receptive and bred. And so, when you think Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, you think those big northern states, earlier fawns, more time to grow, more time to put on weight, and you still see that in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois. But as you start to trend south, you don't get that as much. They're born later. They don't have time to hit that critical threshold of weight. And also it comes down to nutrition too, right? I mean, if the nutrition is good in a lot of those states, they're going to be able to achieve that weight quicker. Than other ones.
What percentage of, maybe this is a question for you, do you know what percentage of doe fawns actually do come into heat that first year?
Depends on the state. States like Iowa, we've seen indications upwards of 50+% because they are able to hit that critical weight. They have healthier fawns. States like North Carolina and stuff, you may see under 10%.
Interesting.
So I think it just depends location of area and stuff, but truly the places that have fawns that reach receptive weights and status, you see what Jeff's talking about here, which is that true second peak. Like it for a fact, like scrapes are reopened, there's chasing, there's rutting activity, And in a lot of states, Ohio and Pennsylvania being one, sometimes that occurs around that opening or later part of gun season.
Well, dude, I've seen that at our farm in as late as January. It's been like late January. I'm like, oh, this is a late hunt, and maybe our doe ratio is way out of skew.
That would be my take in your property,
probably
in the late season, especially.
Yep, I've seen some hard chasing in January.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of cool as you get it. It's pretty defined. Like I was talking, like you get, from what I see is, when you get into those northern areas, northern Minnesota, the UP and Michigan, upstate New York, northern Wisconsin, Lake Superior, where you get the snow effect belts, say near Bradford, Pennsylvania, the Allegheny Forest, where you're getting that lake effect snow coming in. Those ruts are so defined because if they're born early, they die. If they're born late, they die.
Yep.
And so then that also makes for a very defined second rut.
Yep.
And where when you get into more like Kentucky, you could have, I would imagine, a broader distribution of fawns.
100%.
They can be born early. They don't die. They can be born late. They're still going to make it through the winter because they're not winter die. You look at the UP of Michigan as an extremity, 50% of all fawns die in the UP of Michigan on an average winter. That's 50,000 fawns up there. That's just an average winter.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, and that also comes into play because it usually keeps the buck to doe ratio back in tighter check as well, which also keeps your rut in check. I was telling these guys, we were in Illinois last week, I guess, end of last week. Beginning last week, and I had two spotted fawns come through on me down there. Oh, wow. And I mean, they couldn't have been more than 20 pounds a piece. I mean, I would have to assume that like end of September, maybe even early October born fawns. But if you hear the farmers talk about those areas, especially as we get into this time of year, those fields are full of like 30, 40 does and a couple scraggly bucks chasing. So it's just does getting missed and missed and missed and missed. And so, some of these does in Pittsburgh's another area in these suburban type places where, a doe could get missed in 2 cycles and not get bred until December or January easily.
Mm-hmm. And will she keep coming in until she is bred? Until
a certain point to where she essentially shuts it down. But normally I highly doubt anything.
Shuts it down.
Yeah, well, just because of timing of she knows if she has her fawn, it's going to die.
Gotcha.
Or her body's not in good enough shape to carry the fetus when she's born or when she's bred. But most of them, I mean, there's plenty of places. Southern Mississippi's another one where those deer get bred in March.
Yeah.
And they'll have their fawns in September, October, November.
Well, it's pretty cool how it all works because can you imagine like if there was a trickle rut up in northern Minnesota.
Yeah.
And those bucks, they couldn't rut for 4 months.
No, they'd be dead.
And so let alone the does. And so that's like in the UP of Michigan. I know they abort fawns during deer yarding areas and that tough winter. They just won't even have it. I think they average 1 fawn per doe up there and then only a half a fawn recruitment going into the fall makes it, and then half of those live, so you're talking a quarter fawn per doe going into the spring in some of those areas. It's amazing how it just doesn't build a herd very fast.
No, that's an interesting point from Jeff too. Is I would have to imagine that like with the fawn die off, that the buck, like the likelihood for them to live from year to year decreases drastically the longer they have to rut too.
100%. I mean, the stress on the body.
That giant 3-year-old that I found locked up, he was like locked up with another buck. That was at the end of December 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, probably feeding off of either a doe fawn or a missed estrus deer that's triggered it back in. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, and I saw this in the South more than I did in the North, although you see it a lot, is I would find, 3, 4, 5-year-old bucks dead often in the South post-winter, not because it got cold and they froze to death, but because it's the lowest time of resources and food for those deer in the area. And the rut would string them along so long, they literally would rut themselves to death. There was nothing left of them, and they couldn't sustain it with such a low food resource that was available, especially in February and March. Once you hit mid-March, late March in Mississippi, Alabama, like green up has happened, they're okay. But that late February and early March timeframe is just brutal. It doesn't matter where you are with whitetails. I mean, it's just a nasty time of the year.
Yeah.
And that's where, we kind of from the rut, and we were talking earlier about those late season food sources. It's just crazy because you can have bucks right now that have that period of time of 10 days, 2 weeks where there's really not much rutting going on. They just put the feed bag on.
100%.
if it's warm out, like today it's 42 right now, it'll be a good sit tonight. But if it was 60 today, they'll wait till after dark. There's 100%. No reason for them to move. They don't have that urge. They're kind of just sitting back there lazy and fat. It's almost like an October day.
Yep.
At that point, I'm hunting the side right now. We have high winds today, gusts up to 30, which is heavy for us. And so I'm hunting on the lee side of a ridge. I can hunt Minnesota or Wisconsin, but the number one spot I can get to that's the quietest would be over in Wisconsin. So I'm going to hunt there tonight. So I can at least watch a food source that's not windy. That doesn't mean there's going to be deer moving, but it's at least I'm in a kind of a safe area.
So when you say late season food source, what are you hunting over tonight?
I'm hunting over, it's kind of a blend. Half of it is brassica, and it's really good, which we can talk about because I hit it hard with plot boost and plot start this year and put the urea on it.
Nice.
So I hit it. It's been better than we've had in about 6 years. Lots of volume though. And then the other half of the plot, it was late planted beans, peas, light oats. And then I top dressed it with 250 pounds of rye. So it's funny because you'll see when it gets colder, like when there's snow on the ground, they'll be over on the brassica side. Right now they're on the late oats, beans, peas. It's more like the candy side.
Yep.
And that also gets smashed down the fastest. So those switch over. They especially hit the radishes. They pick the radishes right now, but those turnips, they wait till later.
Interesting.
So that's what I'm hitting there. And here, like I'm looking, this is my yard. I have like, right here, probably 1.5 to 2 acres of corn, and then the same in brassica. It's all divided right here. This is an area where they'll hit this after dark, but it pulls them away from all the neighboring woods. And we're surrounded by ag right here. So even for them to get here, like I'm looking over at a woods over there, I bet you it's 3/4 of a mile across the field. So it's really isolated here. So if I pull deer after dark, we came in last night and there was 5 deer just bedded in the yard. And I know it's because it was 2 hours after dark. They probably fed on the food plot and they just lounged over there in the yard, kind of in between. But that's here. I have 50% corn, 50% greens because we have bigger food plot space here. There we have 2.25 acres of food in Wisconsin, 2.5 acres. And then here I have 15.5.
Wow.
So completely different.
I thought it was, again, per talking to you, this is my first year with rye grain, right? First, I was like, and I kind of went back and forth. I had planted brassicas in the past, and I was like, I really want to take a stab at this. Like, how do I get these deer to stick around more in October and then into November versus what seemed to be end of November, December. They'd wipe out my brassicas, and we're talking small plots behind my house here in Pennsylvania. And then that was kind of like it. I was dead in the water. And I put some annual clover in there too, but I thought what was really cool is I've got an exclosure cage in that plot. And like in October, I mean, they would hit it a little bit, but we had a decent amount of chestnut oaks that were dropping pretty strong acorns. But as we got into November, like I could clearly see that the browsing had started. And like usually right now, because we're a few days away from the gun season in Pennsylvania, they've mauled my brassicas and they'll still visit, but there's not much food for them, right? Not at all. If I look in my exclosure cage, I mean, the rye in there is a foot and a half tall. I mean, it's huge. But what's crazy is around in the plot, I still have 6 to 8 inch tall rye because it's still growing, right? When normally my brassica is gone, it's mowed to the ground. It ain't coming back.
No, after that first frost, it's not growing anymore.
Yeah.
Where rye, they said it, I think Michigan State University, they had it germinate down to 37 degrees Celsius.
I think that's what I shared with you the other day. I was like, man, like even us being in like the 40s this week, like in a sunny 40-degree day, like that rye is growing.
Yeah.
It's standing up straight.
Yeah. And
it's not laying over. It's not, like alfalfa around here. We have all kinds of beautiful, lush alfalfa. And that was all brown with the first frost like 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they could hit it. They'll dig through the snow, but it's cool that it's around because it's, the nutrition levels are what, a third of what it was?
Sure.
Or a quarter?
Yeah.
But it's there. It's tons of food.
Yep.
It's good for them, but it's not something they hit every night at all. I mean, it's just kind of a passing thought.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see because I've played with that in numerous places. Like I've done oats and then get hit hard with like frost and freeze in the oats and they kind of die back and stuff. But that rye has kind of stood the test of time. And the fact that it's late November when we're recording this and even going into early December, like it's still growing. It's still producing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you get, well, even a January thaw,
Mm-hmm.
like there's times I've looked at, and that's what's cool too. It's, what's crazy, as soon as it gets spring green up though,
Yeah.
and you have all the lush forbs and forages in the woods and that early spring growth, they just leave the rye alone completely.
Oh, I'm sure it explodes.
But it gets, and so by that time though, there's times where you could have an open field where half of it's open in the middle because it's a little bit lower, dark soil, it's melting. And then you have that rye poking through, and I'll drive through in an area in Michigan, and there'll be 50 deer out in a wheat field, because winter wheat's not that much different than winter rye.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have those cold temperatures. But then again, as soon as the spring green up hits and it's in the woods, then they're
gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, because I know a lot of people that we talk to are looking for the nutrition side, but ultimately everybody's thinking about the hunting season, and especially as you get out of that early November part to the late part to gun season in December and the late season. Like I feel like, at least for me, I've always hammered on brassica, right? That seemed to be the way to go.
Yeah.
And it, I kind of transitioned a little bit to this winter rye, thinking more of October and early November. And here it is, when I normally would be like, well, my brassica's gone. Like maybe I pull a buck in here or there, to where I've got a pretty lush food plot that's only a 1/4 acre behind the house, and the deer can't keep up with it.
It's nice and green.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's kind of, that's why I always split.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have the full brassica on one half, and then some type of candy crop on the other, like late planted peas, beans, even light oats. Sometimes I'll mix tillage radish in there too, but then I'm top dressing it. Even buckwheat, like if I have leftover buckwheat, I'll put it into that half, because until they get the first frost, they like eating that young buckwheat.
Yep.
Even though it's planted August 1st. And then I'll top dress it with that rye. And then that rye is that workhorse. It's there all the way. So then I look at it like, that's probably one of the most missed time in the food plot woods for nutrition, is that 2 to 4 weeks before spring green up.
100%.
Because nothing's green, nothing's left. And rye is what fills that area, or winter wheat.
Yep.
Oats can't, because they're all yellow in the north. They're all dead and brown. But rye or wheat, and even if it's only 12-14% protein, it's still
something.
It's still green. And they hit it hard.
Did you plant brassicas this year?
Up on the mountain.
How'd they do?
Not great.
Really?
Yeah.
Just didn't grow well. Interesting. I've had like the best brassica year I've ever had. Like they look fantastic. I've got a ton of food on my place.
I have some radishes that I took pictures of on Instagram. It was, I don't know how many posts ago, but boy, those things had to be 14-15 inches long and probably 4 inches in diameter.
Jeez.
They're just, and you look at that with all the green that's on top of it, it's just, there's so much food out there now.
And the amount of organic matter you're putting back into the soil is insane as well.
Oh, just those radish, the tilled radish is just incredible.
Yeah,
it's fun. I mean, it's a good rotation, and because the brassicas tend to take, with those radishes in the mix, I usually cut my brassica mix in half, and then add 6 or 7 pounds of radish to make up for it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's one of the things. The other thing that I think a lot of people drift to from, and it, maybe in some cases you've got it, in a lot of cases you don't, is any kind of standing beans, during this time of year. It seemed like obviously deer kind of laid off of them there once everything turned, leaves fell off, everything browned out. And now it's like full circle back, that if they're standing beans with pods on them, they're coming after them.
Oh, especially when it's cold.
Yep.
But I've had clients that they had 40-50 deer on their beans February, March, and then the next year they rot because it was a warm winter, and they never left their fall areas. So their fall habitat. So then the beans just sit there. But then a lot of people plant beans and they don't have enough space.
Yeah.
And there's, the beans are down to the dirt by October 1st.
Yeah.
I had a weird turnout with beans this year. I planted 2 different spots. Both of them are roughly like 1.5 acres. And one of them I actually hunted the other night. Looks great. Obviously the leaves are dead at this point, but there's a ton of beans on there, a bunch of pods, and the deer were hitting them really good. And in a different area, same deal, similar pod production. You could see it, a month or 2 ago, but it's completely gone. And
really?
I can't tell if they've just been hammering those pods like up until this point, or if they just fell off. It's the exact same brand of, they're all the real world wildlife beans is what they are.
Was there more summer deer use there, like does and fawns? Because that's what I see
Probably.
a lot of times. Like, there's areas where if there's a ton of summer use, they just wipe them out. And that's what the previous landowner had here. You know, we have 15.5 acres and we have corn, our brassica blend and the green blend. So we have a lot of food, but he just had brassica and it was about 5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all down to the dirt by October 1st, and all the does and fawns hit it all year, you know, all summer long. And then that was it. Where you can have an isolated spot where there's no does and fawns because they're out in ag or they're somewhere else, someone else's food plot. And then those beans can grow in an area where a mile away they get hammered. And so it'd be interesting, you know, if there are more does and fawns there, that could be.
I'm not going to make it about me again, but like, man, I've got a lot to talk to Jeff about since we talked last time, and just like the way that my properties unfolded this season has been pretty depressing, actually.
It started off strong.
It started off real strong. I think, when did we talk to you, Jeff? In September sometime? Maybe late August?
Yeah. I was saying it was early. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
it was August.
Yeah, it was before the mule deer hunt, I guess. And we had a bunch of bucks. Like, I had probably 7 or 8 different, what I would call shooter bucks, 4-year-old or older bucks. Yeah. I think all but 1 or maybe 2 of them have like left, just up and left as of like mid-October, October 20th.
Yeah.
Right about there, about when you start expecting it to get like good. And it's not because of food. It can't be. I mean,
you got way too much
I've got
food.
A ton of food.
And
I've got decent cover too.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm thinking these deer are just like rutting somewhere else. Like,
I think it's diversity of cover. Bless you.
Yeah.
On your place, and that you've got a lot of timber blocks that you've done, I think, great TSI work on, but like you lack any just like thicket CRP type stuff, overgrown old fields.
So that's my next.
Like
that's my next project. Is in the spirit of cover. I'm gonna go in and try to create a bunch more like early successional type of habitat in existing ag ground and an old pasture. Both of which I'm just gonna kill off and potentially turn over, and I think let the seedbed take over.
I know that it is so right now is so critical to have hardwood regeneration.
Yeah,
and so acorns don't do anything right now.
Yeah,
you know, it's even just straight conifer. There's no food in that, so it's all that daytime browse. So if you have great food plots but you don't have daytime browse, like the hardwood regeneration, briars, all that early successional growth, shrub tips, then the deer aren't going to be there because they have to live on that during the day. And it's even more important now than it was 3 months ago when there was forbs and forages and green and weeds. And that's where like you do controlled burns in the woods and all that greenery is great, but it's worth nothing in November.
Yeah, it's gone.
In December. So that cutting is so critical. And like around here, we have both properties here in Wisconsin, the lease in Wisconsin, the property owned here, we have a lot of junk. So we have a lot of aspen, box elder, even cherry. And so all that regeneration that you get from cutting, and it's more diverse. Then we have our oaks mixed in, which is really nice. Kind of a good balance here. And we have some invasives like honeysuckle, but they love eating those honeysuckle leaves right now
100%.
too.
Would
and
you
so they're on those?
Do you look at any of these woody areas, Jeff, and think, you know, even at let's say December, January, where the season's still cranking, to go in and drop any of these trees to bring new browse down to a lower level? Or is it like, hey, at this point, it's going to do more harm than good in terms of pressure, and I'm not worried about it?
Well, our season in Minnesota right here ends, I think, on the 3rd of January.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm literally cutting that weekend.
Gotcha.
So I cut pretty quick. And it might affect some of the sheds we find, but other than that, it's so valuable for going. So I don't have a lot of cutting time because it's when I'm going to clients in January, February, March. But even if I go out and cut 8 tanks of chainsaw gas this year, would be about 8 hours of cutting, or about 10 hours of cutting. Then, and that's the thing too. It's like, I have some big open hollows here that you can see from one side to the other. There's a lot of open big timber. But just to cut pockets, you know, like 1 tank of gas, if I go out and cut, and that might be a half acre, 3/4 of an acre, that's enough. And if I do another one 80 yards away, and another one 80 yards away or 60, then pretty soon you only cut 15 pockets on 150 acres. And it's actually enough to separate deer and give them their own spots. They're not looking at each other. They have their own browse spots. because they're not moving 300 yards during the day or 100 yards. They're
Right.
sitting in their bedding areas. So
How big is the farm in Minnesota? Is it $150?
we have 245,
And
we added 67 acres this year. So
and how much of that is wooded?
that's a good question. I think it's I would guess overall about 210.
Okay.
And then, out of that remaining 35, there's a lot of edge.
Yeah.
So we have, out of that remaining 35, I had 15 acres in food plot. I have about 10 acres of switchgrass. And then I have pollinator blends that I frost seeded.
Yep.
So I'll have about 3 acres of pollinator blends, and those flank the switchgrass.
Got it.
Because switchgrass is doing phenomenal. It gives us cover on our outside edge where all the food plots are for access. But we also have a pheasant population that's just barely holding on. And I know I don't even know. I literally might have 2 miles of switchgrass.
Wow.
There's some that's only 6 feet wide. There's some that's 30 feet wide. And then imagine that pollinator blend kind of flanking that, running alongside. So we have a lot of bee balm, different types of goldenrod, but they're blooming all different times of the year. And then you have briar edge too. So we're making kind of it's funny, you focus on whitetail, but what you end up getting, and if you create diverse whitetail habitat, which whitetails are creatures of edge and diversity, then you get good rabbit and pheasant cover too.
100%. But it's funny.
Kind of the whole picture.
We had a guy write us on the podcast that was talking about basically like a songbird program for conservation. He had entered in Pennsylvania, and he said, "Listen, when I bought my property, it was shit. Right? The habitat was trash. I entered into this warbler project, which most people would look at it from a deer standpoint and be like, what the hell are you doing?" He's like, but in 4 or 5 years from now, with the co-op monies they're giving me and the plan that I'm in, I'm going to have phenomenal deer hunting because of the early successional stuff that they're doing in the edge that they're creating and things like that. And so it's one of those things that, again, maybe we even get funneled into this group of, we think deer so much that if you start to think more early successional, whether it's rabbits or pheasants or whatever, the fact is you're creating great deer habitat at the same time.
Oh yeah. And I think really, truly, because you can create pheasant habitat, we have some projects just down the road. It's like 2 miles down the road from my house here. They've worked on pheasant habitat for decades. And I know the person, our mail lady around here, they actually supplied their pheasants. They've transplanted thousands of pheasants, and I don't even know if there's any alive. And what it is they end up putting a lot of pollinator mixes with grasses. It's kind of like a dual mix, and they have hundreds of acres planted down here, and all lays down during the wintertime.
Yeah.
So there's an example of you're putting pheasant habitat in that's not even helping pheasants, but because of the lack of cover, you don't get whitetail habitat either.
Yeah, there's no structure.
Yeah, and so that structure, whether it's the briars, regeneration, shrubs, and especially the switchgrass around here, it'll give that cover that they need all winter long.
I'm curious.
And so that in turn is, actually rabbits. It's almost like rabbit cover. If you have good rabbit cover, it's hard not to have good whitetail cover.
Yeah.
Agree.
I'm curious, Jeff, about the switchgrass strategy. And I know you're a big proponent of switchgrass. Somebody who we talked to about that is Dr. Craig Harper. Do you know who that is?
Yep.
He's out of, what is he, Missouri? Tennessee State. And I was talking to him about some of our, pasture situations. It's like, man, I've got all this ground that's, useless, or, maybe it's in cool season grass that lays over in the winter and stuff. And I was like, man, what should I do? I was like, should I plant something? He's like, no, let me stop you right there. He's like, you just need to kill it and let it go. He's like, whatever grows there in the natural seed bed, he's like, that's the best thing for it. And I think he alluded to some studies regarding other things that were planted in comparison to things that were just left go. And it was his opinion, I guess, that ultimately the native seedbed and what that yielded was the best case result.
Yeah, and the problem with that, it takes about 25 years. And so 25 years, the fields that I hunt in Wisconsin right now, they farmed in the 50s, and most of it's goldenrod. And so because of how much they strip the soil, you could have said, well, we let it go from the 50s, and that's a case where 70 years now it's worthless. And so out there, we have about 3 acres of switchgrass planted. That's the only thing that actually holds pheasants or rabbits or gives deer cover. So it really depends on the soil, for one thing, how much it's been farmed, how much it's been chemically controlled, plowed, tilled, what's going to be in the soil, what rootstock's been destroyed, what's still there.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you can take switchgrass like I did around here, and you could have 7-8 foot high switchgrass strips within 2 years.
Yeah.
We have 4 foot high. We have enough switchgrass by the end of a good growing summer. If you prepared your soil right, chemically controlled it, and it's weed free, we have enough switchgrass to actually house rabbits the end of the first year. So if you just let it go, like one thing driving by, if you look out there for deer cover, it takes a long time to fill in. Let's say you're looking at a 40-acre piece, for deer to actually be able to hold in that cover when you drive by on the road. And actually you look out there, and for them to actually hold there and have enough cover, whether it's gray dogwood pockets, whatever comes in. And if it just comes in ragweed and goldenrod and thistle, you don't have much. But when you put that switchgrass out there, like you take a 10-acre area and you put 5 acres in switchgrass, just pockets, you line the field in it. Now it doesn't really matter. Now that early successional growth that you allow to have come in there, you get your diversity, you get what's in the soil, but then you have the structure like Jeremy was talking about of the switchgrass. Without that structure of the switchgrass, it could be 25 years on average. In that case, in Wisconsin, we're working on 70 years where there's nothing out there except what we've planted in switchgrass and plots. And then in other cases, it might take 15, especially down south, where you could have faster growth or a longer growing season.
So is there a way to like sample the seed bed to see like, hey, what is this going to look like in 5 10 years?
I think it's just time.
Well,
I mean, that's the unfortunate part about it, is you're going to let it go fallow.
Sure. Well, that's the short answer to Jeff's response there is time. If you want quick, quality cover quickly. And I think the next step in that conversation as well, switchgrass doesn't have any food, but I think I'm also aware of, Jeff, you like planting like small micro food plots throughout it.
It's so critical because like the pollinator blends are putting in around here, they have some big blue stems, some switchgrass in it, some Indian grass, and they have lots of forbs and forages. And that's awesome because for the entire growing season, the critters have food.
Sure.
But when that is laying all down from December through March, every animal that's relating to that dies or they don't have cover. So the problem is, like with all those mixes, a lot of the pheasant mixes, if you don't have solid pockets of some type of structure, it doesn't matter if it was red cedar, say like down in southern Indiana, you could have big blue stem Indian grass that would stay there all winter long because you don't have enough snow to cover it up and smash it down.
Right.
You have to have that structure. The more you mix food within that structure, the more you don't have that structure and cover. So the cover dilutes the structure. So in the case of a 10-acre field, you want 50% in solid cover. Whatever is, like here would have to be switchgrass unless you're planting shrubs, but then the shrubs are going to take a long time to grow. Whether it's 10, 12 years. And I always encourage landowners too, think this isn't something that should take 10 years or 15 years. Think 3 years from now, because the average landowner owns their land for 5 years, 7 years. Everyone thinks we're going to have this until we die. This is where I'm going to hunt. Even my property here, I don't want to take 10 years. What if I have to sell it in 2 years? I want to enjoy it right now.
Right.
And so switchgrass gives me that option of right now, but you don't want to plant all switchgrass because like you said, then you don't have food.
Sure.
It's kind of, and people talk to me about, well, you want diversity. So plant different types of grass in one area. Well, if 80% of that grass lays down in the wintertime, then that 20% isn't enough to provide cover. And more grass isn't diversity, it's just more grass. And so I'm talking about diversity. Like I love like what they're talking about as far as letting what's there naturally grow. I like doing that, but then again, adding that 50% in switchgrass or 40% in switchgrass, where you have solid switchgrass cover, solid big blue stem down south, Indian grass, shrubs, whatever you can get. Maybe so you take a 40-acre area of red cedar, and someone will say, well, we need to remove all that red cedar, and then they're planting hardwood tubes of tubed hardwood. We'll leave out of that 40 acres of red cedar, leave 15 acres, and the 25 acres plant hardwoods, let it go to early successional growth. Now you have the best of everything because that cedar was your base structure, just like the switchgrass. And you're just carving out and removing the rest and spot spraying to make sure red cedar doesn't come into those 25 acres or those 20 acres. Now you have true diversity, plus you have the structure of cover that will actually hold deer. So it's kind of like that. even going on property we were talking about in the woods, you want that hardwood regeneration. What I don't have here is conifer. And so just talking about that, getting white spruce, white pine. And once you cut those pockets, then you can stab those back in those cuttings and they'll be protected and caged from deer. But those both and white spruce, white pine, they're both shade tolerant. So then I don't care if they're only 5 feet tall in 15 years. At least there's something side cover.
You got some thermal cover there too.
Yeah. Yep. So it's kind of like you're just taking what you have and you need that base cover always. So that switchgrass is immediate. It gives you, and it, like I said, it could be down south. It's more, I mean, they have some of the grass CRP mixes in Iowa, southern Iowa, Missouri, I'm sure down to Mississippi, Tennessee.
Yep.
They're standing beautifully. Then they'll stand there. It'll give cover all winter long.
So if you're trying to, you said like 50% would be in switchgrass. Is that you're just seeding at half the rate and letting the seed bed take over the rest, or you're planting in addition?
You want it solid so that it provides that cover that it can provide. So you want it solid, meaning that so literally if you had 10-acre field, 4 or 5 acres would be switchgrass. That would be the surrounding area of the field so you can't see in. And then pockets, lines, however you want to disperse it on the inside, but it'd be solid switchgrass. And then the rest you could just do nothing with. What I would advise in the rest of it, though, is to treat it with a grass-specific herbicide, because in a lot of areas, especially the north half of the country, if it's not switchgrass, it's not providing cover during the winter. It's not food either way.
Sure.
Yeah.
So whatever grass is coming in, it's not good grass.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Jeff, when you look at like a hardwood situation, let's say you've got a property that's got a little bit of tillable on it, but it's primarily wooded and obviously working on the TSI side, do you see using switchgrass still on those tillable areas, or is planted food become more of a critical factor there?
Only and that's kind of here, like I said, we have, let's just say 35 acres of open and 210 of woods. So our open area is at a premium, but we're putting those switchgrass lines in there.
Okay.
Now, if someone had a 40-acre wood lot and they only had, like over in Wisconsin where I'm at, we only have, because of it's so steep.
Yeah.
And we only have room for about 2.25 acres of food plot. And then I was able to kill and broadcast. And some we machine planted, some we frost seeded switchgrass, but we got it established. And that would be, let's say 3 acres of switchgrass, but we couldn't plant food plots there. And that gives us lines. And a lot of that's just 6-foot edging around our food plots. So we're not taking up a lot of space.
Gotcha.
It's
and so almost like a feathered edge there.
Yes. Yeah. It's more a screening edge. So the deer feel comfortable out in those food plots and they can't look out and see. We can look down to them, depending on where we're at.
Yep.
But and then we have some pockets of switchgrass that were not good locations, say for access areas. We have a beautiful top where we could plant an acre food plot, but we have to walk by it.
Yeah.
So we can't plant a food plot there. So it was a one flat spot. We could put some switchgrass, and that helps pheasants, rabbits, and it helps our access better then.
And are you looking at, I guess, because if I'm looking at some of my hardwood areas that I could plant, I could probably put a half-acre kill plot there. But if I could go in and cut trees and open the area up just so it has more canopy opening, are you saying that you could go in there and just literally seed switchgrass in an area that maybe wouldn't be as favorable for a food plot just to build some of that cover into that spot?
Now, I don't advise putting it in the woods just because once it gets shaded out, it's killed.
It's dead. Yeah.
So I look at conifer is not that much different than switchgrass. You take the location they needed to grow. And so if you're making cuttings in the woods like I am here, I can't put switchgrass back there unless I get a dozer in there and literally remove all the trees and timber and the potential of future shade. But I can stab conifers back in there, just seedlings like white pine or white spruce that's shade tolerant. And I can put those back in there, and that'll change the diversity of the woods in that location over the next 20 years. And then those conifers are always there.
Awesome.
Like a white pine, I know the virgin white pines, they lived 400 years.
Yeah.
Go back in the late 1800s, they took out. I've seen a couple of those in the UP. On a side note, it took 4.5 of us to get our 4.5 guys to get your arms around a couple of those. Man. It's incredible. They don't have a branch for 60 feet. They were down in valleys. They said the logging boss probably missed them, just looked out over the horizon, didn't see them. But then you have, to me, the conifer's not food.
Yep.
But it's thermal cover like switchgrass.
Yep.
It's side cover like switchgrass. And now in the north, it's snow hindrance cover, which is a little bit different than switchgrass, but because it collects snow and allows it to evaporate and filter down, so there's less snow in there, they can move around more freely, like in the deer yards, cedar yards. But it's not that much different in use to wildlife and especially deer.
So more in a wooded situation, look at those, white pine, more conifer based situation where you have field or old field opportunities more on the switchgrass side.
Yes.
I'd assume you're talking about on your place in Ohio, though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you have anywhere big enough to do that. I think like where we've planted white pine, we did a bunch, and I've seen maybe 20% of them made it, maybe, just because they get rubbed. They get rubbed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like when you're putting these back, unless you cage them, I would put them back in the cuttings. And that's when they first get that initial burst of sun too, for 2 or 3 years before the cuttings take off.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
But then they're caged. So like if I'm just cutting timber in here and I'm not cutting high dollar timber, I'm cutting junk cherry trees that are twisted. I'm cutting out some of the junk oaks.
Yep.
Favoring some of the mature oaks. Some of the oaks I'm keeping are the ones that loggers would want to take because they're those big giant mass produced. But I'm keeping them for wildlife, and then I'm cutting out some of the junk ones, and then I'm cutting box elder, cherry, aspen thickets, just junk.
Yeah.
And so then I'm just dropping those trees, or in case of box elder, I'm hinge cutting. But any of those areas that I'm just dropping trees, just a full cut, then you can go back in those tops and debris and stab those conifers back in.
And it almost protects them a little bit there.
Yeah, I'm sure
it's
it would
almost
help.
like putting cages. You just step back in there. Like you could put in an acre just 50 to 100 trees, pockets of 3 or 4, 5 or 10. So that means you can step back in a top and just stab them around that top that's not connected, so it's not shading them out, and then just let them go.
Interesting.
Versus, I think where you were planting
out in
like
the
in the
out in the field.
Yeah, I'm sure that would help a lot.
And that's where I switch it over to like switchgrass.
There you go.
They're not going to eat it, and that's part of the problem. I mean, it's almost like any wildlife planting, if it's a tree or shrub, means wildlife food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, red osier dogwood's awesome, but try planting that out in the middle or next to a food plot. The deer even Norway spruce, or they'll even eat white pine. I mean, they'll eat it down to the dirt.
Those are the two I planted, are Norway spruce and white pine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just so many of them just got rubbed, I think, or eaten. But I planted them all out in the open. I really like that idea of planting them into tops.
So I'm thinking like on that Ohio place that I have.
Do you know what I mean?
Now.
It's by stabbing them too. There's a tool you go and just like spread the earth, put your seedling
dump
in.
them in. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the dibble bar.
Yep.
What is it called?
Dibble.
Dibble
I think
bar.
it's a dibble bar.
Dibble bar.
Dibble bar.
Yeah.
Is like in those pine areas on those fingers that I was telling you about. Remember, I have those giant pines. Dropping those giant pines and stabbing them in there.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Sweet. You learn a lot of this stuff by mistake.
Yeah.
And so, plus I get to see all my clients. If I go to 110 clients a year, I get to learn by their mistakes too. But a lot of them are my own. And we planted 9,000 conifers back in the mid 90s on the first piece of land that I bought. It was 36 and a half acres. And we planted 9,000 conifers in 2 years out in the open. And I mean, we might as well just put like corn cobs out in the ground. It's like I don't even know. I've driven by there. I've actually had a client right across the street and near Cass City on the Cass River in Thumb area, Michigan. And I don't even know if there's 100 of those alive.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, they just, and I think that's the thing that people have to realize is like, when you go at this from a management standpoint, like you're going to make way more mistakes than you have successes, but you're going to learn things from that. And you're also going to find some surprise successes and be like, man, like I just went in there and cut these and I didn't think it'd be anything. Now it's my best bedding area on the property.
Yeah. Yeah. And so often, a lot of times people have worked at planting for 15 years, 90% gets eaten or rubbed on or broken. But then what's left, because they planted stuff for so long, there's so much diversity. Now, all of a sudden, the stuff that did grow, it's almost by accident.
Right.
That you planted. So that's why I like on my channel, I try to teach or come up with videos that help people learn from other people's mistakes, including my own.
Yeah.
And so that seems like the best way to learn because, I mean, we were 24, 25 years old when he planted those conifers, 25, 26, right around there. And the cost of those trees, even though you'd get, I don't even remember what they were. I don't know if it was $1,000 for $200 you get back then, the seedlings.
Mm-hmm.
It was still a lot of money for us.
Yeah,
no doubt.
1,000 2 years, and we wasted all that money. If someone would have told me, if you do this, these will die, then of course we would have come up with other alternatives. But we wasted a lot of money back then. So you try to keep people from doing that if you can.
Have you looked at any of the like state or NRCS programs for some of this stuff, Jeff, or tapped into any of it?
Well, even back then in the 90s, so I hunted areas that were, I'd see 25 deer, and this is in the thumb area, flat area of Michigan, farmland, where 80 acres within 640 acres, a section of land was a lot of cover.
Yeah.
That a lot of times it was 10 or 20 or 5 acres. And so I saw, I'd see a swale that was 5 acres, and you'd see 25 deer pour out of there. So I wanted to take that same, there's a thicket with conifer mixed in, a little hardwoods off to the side. That's what I wanted to do, is kind of duplicate that on my 36 acres. So then we wanted to order all these trees. His name was Jeff. I think he's still a forester or biologist. He might be. I know he's in the area. It was for Tuscola County. He told me, he said, that sounds great for wildlife. And they even had something in there that said they found like grouse studies in Minnesota. If you staggered your plantings, it increased grouse populations 10 times over because it decreased predation, warfare, and disease among species, game species. So he's like, yeah, this is great. You plant these in pockets and staggered, but the kicker is we can't give you any cost share assistance because the state wanted them planted all in rows, 7x7 spacing, 8x8, and it makes sense because the state is giving you cost share assistance because they expect revenue from that timber to come back in at some point in the form of taxes.
100%.
And so, back then as a 25-year-old, 26-year-old, I was looking at it like, this is BS,
Yeah. Yeah.
But, when you understand it, it makes sense why they're giving you a cost share, and they're not just doing it to give you a free program. So we had to pay for it all. And then I find here a lot of the mixes, like if you get CRP or something, like someone will say, I've had a lot of clients that have actually pulled out a CRP. I can think of one right over here by Rushford. They had a 20-acre lower field. They put it all into CRP. They had deer dreams, wildlife dreams. But then again, it lays all down during the winter. So we're out there. You could hardly say a mouse is living out there in February.
It's just flat.
So he was pulling that out so that he can convert it to switchgrass and habitat to actually hold wildlife. And that's, again, the problem. If it can be the best diverse food blend with a little bit of grass thrown in, but if it's laying down all winter, then it's no good. So then a lot of the CRP mixes, they don't allow you to plant straight switchgrass. They don't allow you to plant straight conifer in pockets. And so there are programs that let you do that, especially there's some with like thinning and edge habitat I've seen where they'll actually come in and they'll have you cut and plant edging along a food source or ag field. But a lot of the programs don't allow you to have that diversity that hits like that Keebler's. If that's the type of habitat they're doing, that requires a certain age timber, but then you're cutting, allowing regeneration. It's almost very diverse.
It is.
Or like that pheasant mix, if it's just straight pheasant mix and it drops down in the wintertime, it's not really very diverse.
Well, and that seems crazy, man, because especially if you think about that pheasant habitat that's next to you, like it's providing most of its food in late spring through the summer time frame. Meanwhile, you're in like ag central, and it's like they've got access to as much stuff as they need. Like, why not focus on the most limited time, which is, really from end of November through, March.
Yeah. And that's where, so there was a client of mine down in Southwest Wisconsin. He got a program where they allowed him to plant 10 acres. It might even been more than that, more like 30, but of switchgrass. So he planted this in. That was part of a CRP program. He's locked in for a long period of time.
Oh, yeah.
So you think, well, switchgrass, great. I'm talking about switchgrass here, but it was 100% switchgrass.
Yeah.
So this, whatever pheasant or rabbit he had lived around the outside because that's where they had access to some type of food or diversity. But deer, pheasant, rabbits, you go in the middle of that switchgrass, there's nothing.
Yeah, it's like a desert.
It's a desert. So I can see where like switchgrass or solid grass, even red cedar gets a bad rap because people are thinking of just that monoculture. But if you combine it with that being your base and then diversifying it with early successional growth or plantings that are like, I like in those fields, you can take red maple seeds, just kill it out so it's down to the dirt. You can just throw red maple seeds, box elder seeds. They have briars that you can plant shrubs. So if you want to take the time to go in there and plant all this, like big rock trees, they have all kinds of shrub cuttings and aspen cuttings that you can go throw in there pretty easy. So there's ways you can do it to plant it. I'm kind of more like, for me, because of time, I'm more put the switchgrass around the field, create some switchgrass pockets, make sure that it's 40-50% of the area, and then let the rest grow up into early successional growth as long as it's not grass.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I think one people, and maybe it's because they get it. I don't know if they look at the plain states, or maybe they see, like, I know the Pennsylvania Game Commission does it here. You walk into these areas and it's literally a 15 or 20 acre solid field of switchgrass.
Yeah, and that's no good.
There's nothing in it. And so I get it by thought, like, oh, everybody's like, man, this is great thermal cover. There's so many birds. And it's like, yeah, for the first 5 yards into it, and then it's nothing.
Yeah.
Like nothing at all.
And I think a lot of these government programs, even Pheasants Forever mixes, things like that, they're looking at it like they're going to go into a 40 acre field and just plant it and leave.
Yeah.
So they're not looking at, let's surround this and switch. Let's create switchgrass pockets. Let's plant a diverse mix in the other areas. They're a one and done. And even the government programs, they're not going in and taking the time to.
No.
So it is extra work, and it's, do you plant it all and switch? Because that's the easiest, but expensive. And then go out and carve out 50% in the middle and pockets and lines and diversity? Or do you flag those areas off and leave areas that you don't plant switch in, so you're not wasting seed?
Right.
And how do you tell the difference when it's all chemically controlled? So it is more problematic. It takes extra steps. And I think all these programs, they're relying on the latest and greatest mix. You pick this mix, and then you just plant the whole field.
Yeah.
And,
no, that's interesting.
It's kind of like the red cedar removal programs, where 40 acres of red cedar, I can get why they're doing that. There's nothing there. Just kind of like it's almost like you have 40 acres of switchgrass. Let's have a switchgrass eradication program.
Right.
But the switchgrass and the red cedar is the base.
Yeah.
Remove 50% in pockets, 60%. Now you have the ultimate, because now you have diversity, early successional growth, and then you have the base of cover that you have to have for all wildlife.
I think it's interesting as people start to look at their own properties, and, not all cover is equal, right? I mean, and whether you do hardcore TSI or whatever, there's always elements foundationally throughout the season that are missing, on your property. And some things you just might not be capable of. For instance, this property in Ohio, like, I might not be able to do anything but a few lines of switchgrass here and there on the edges, because there's not enough tillable open area. But I think that as people start to examine their property, like, if you go through your entire property, 4 years ago and do a TSI, and, like, you haven't done any stagged cuts since then, like, everything is the same. It's a monoculture throughout.
Right.
Like, you're not establishing these different successional growth cycles that, frankly, all wildlife, including deer and especially deer, want to have on the property. It's just hard for people to, I think, imagine that, because they're just like, well, no, I went through and I TSI'd this thing 4 years ago. And it's like, well, yeah, but, like, you could have went here last year and 2 years ago here and 3 years ago here, and now you've staged this thing a lot different.
Well, and that's what it's kind of it's so different when you're micromanaging small parcels. And a small parcel could be 5 acres, it could be 500.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, it's small enough that you don't encompass the daily lives of a deer herd 365 days.
Right.
You're only a part-time in it. So, you look at a 500 acre block of timber. If you're practicing professional hardwood management, you might cut 5-10 acres every 5 years, and all of a sudden 60 years later, you're back in the rotation of starting over on your first cuts. Well, then you're always playing catch up. Where do the deer bed? Where are they feeding? Where are they browsing? It's always changing, because you're always cutting every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a state, or a large property. So that doesn't apply if you want to have a great whitetail parcel. You need to say, this is your bedding area over here. How can we maintain that long term? This is your hardwood management area. We just do that with select cut every 10 years, 15, 7, whatever the rotation is for your area and the type of wood or type of timber. And then there's bedding over here, and this is food. And that's the second thing, the food. So I hear a lot of people like they'll practice TSI on their property and they have great habitat. Even if they have good early successional growth, hardwood regeneration, it's well distributed around the property. And that can be great if no one else in the neighborhood has any good food, no one else is practicing TSI, you're going to have the property. But the second someone comes in a mile away and puts a good food plot program in on private land, they're taking all your deer away.
Right.
Because deer live every day by that food source. They have to have cover. So if that person has marginal cover and it hasn't even practiced TSI, they just have decent cover, and then they have high quality food, they're going to take all the deer away from that person to practice TSI, because you have to have both.
Right.
Kind of like we're talking about this time of year, you have to have hardwood regeneration, good quality daytime browse, briars, woody shrub tips, and the food plot.
Yep.
On private land,
yeah.
Public land, of course, is a completely different story. Then you're just looking for that diversity.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, you're looking for where hardwoods meet swamp edge, where clear cuts meet old growth. You're looking for that most diversity happen in one spot.
It seems like this has been my revelation on my property this year, is like even those two, when it comes to the rut, at least in my case, are not enough. Like I've got good food plot program. I've got I'll bet everything TSI'd, and those deer left to rut somewhere else.
So that's what I was going to transition.
That's why I'm now looking at this, the pasture restoration project, and whether it's switchgrass or the seed bed, it seems like that's kind of the missing element of like the November piece of this.
Well, that's what I was going to transition, because obviously, Jeff, we talked about it before we opened this up, is you've punched 2 tags here in bow season, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin. And I'm interested, per the habitat we just talked about, what were each of those situations? You pick and choose which one you want to start with here, but kind of lay out the situations of, that deer. Have you seen it before? What was his usage during the time that essentially you harvested him? Because I know your big standpoint, and Jared and I have grasped onto this really big in the last year, really, is being able to influence those deer during the time it matters, which is October, November.
Yeah, and that's something I talk about all the time, and I know we've talked about in the past is, but I have videos that basically talk about articles, are you a herd influencer?
Right.
Because if you have a great deer herd in February to August, you're not a herd influencer.
No.
Because you can only influence when they're dying, and when you can hold them, and when you can advance them to the next age class, when you can affect sex ratios, when you can lower populations or raise them when needed. And so to me, your property has to peak in November, December, and that's always the trick. In October, it should be peaking in November sometime. So to me, like when you see mature bucks on your property in the summertime, that's a bad thing, because that typically their summer habitat is not their fall habitat. For one, summertime, they need shade and overstory. Big bucks do. They can't punch their velvet through hardwood regeneration and thick cover that they prefer to live in during the fall. That high stem count thermal cover, regeneration, browse during the day, they just can't live there. So for one, if they're there during the summer, you have to question, well, how thick is my cover? Is it thick enough? Because if it's thick enough, they're probably not there during the summer. And then 2, if they're on a summer food source, why are they there? And so most summer food sources are not there during October, November. And even like talking beans can be magical right now, going into December, mid-December, end of December. But if you have high deer numbers, they'll be pretty good in October, November too. But if you have moderate deer numbers, the deer can leave those beans alone when they turn brown in October, November. So that just depends on the area. So beans alone can't do it. You have to have that diversity. So I rely heavily on that green. So a neighbor might pull more if they have a 10-acre bean field standing right now, they might pull more bucks in December. But on that green with those does and appreciable food and decent cover, where we have diversity of cover, then I'll get deer during the rut. I'll get deer holding in December. Our second rut is outstanding. October, mid-October, and later you start seeing them come in. So like the first buck in Minnesota, we got a couple pictures of them during the summer. And I was really happy to start seeing pictures of them early October and video of them early October. And so then when I went out to that water hole, we had a great cold front. I did a weather, like peak rut weather sit alert, where that came out on a Sunday. And for those like 5 days in a row, it kept getting colder.
Yeah.
And it was just that perfect time. And it was like October 31st is when I shot him. And then November 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, it was, you can't miss those days anyways. But when you have a cold front that's dropping 20 degrees over those 4 days.
It was amazing.
So that first day on October 31st, I went out to that water hole, and that buck I shot, it's kind of like I really was hoping to see him. There was a bigger one that would have been cool to see too, but he was my top 2 or 3. And so when he came in then, and he was coming into water, but you start to see it's kind of like that, almost like a bell curve, where their use is picking up mid-October. And then if you have December food, it keeps them around a little bit longer. But it's almost like really, and it's the same with the Wisconsin buck. He had hardly been on the property at all. I shot him on November 2nd, and right in that week. And it's just at a time when there's so many mature bucks on the property.
That's the same day that I killed Jeff, November 2nd.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Weren't those? It was such an awesome week.
It was beautiful. Our cold front didn't start until the 1st. I think it was November. The front was still passing through. The 1st was awesome.
Yeah.
The 2nd, I moved into a new spot, and I killed my first booner actually on a secluded food plot on a thicket in Ohio, about 10 miles from my farm. Which a lot of my a lot of my insight to like these properties out here is like I'm looking at a few different properties all in the same area. So they're all getting the same weather fronts. A lot of them have gotten the same attention from me throughout the summer. They're 10 miles away, as far as getting food, getting trail camera monitoring. And man, while my property's just tanking, I've got other properties turning on, and I'm just figuring out where to go and what type of properties to look for moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's crazy because you can have a property that has a lot of mature bucks on it. And boy, the 20th of October, 28th of October, it can just be incredible, where a property next door that needs some of those mature bucks to come over doesn't peak until November 6th or November 10th. That could have to do with food or cover or whatever it is. But you see that little variance too. So it's not like the rut is starting in one spot 10 days earlier than the other spot a half mile down the road. It's just, covering food.
I think it's interesting in that, and especially from probably a lot of people listening to this podcast and thinking like the three of us do, is that it's hard to sit in July, August, even September without bucks on your property when everybody else is saying, look at these velvet bucks, look at these bucks, and still think that you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so hard to put yourself in the shoes of a November bow hunter. It's
almost impossible.
It's so hard to sit there and just to be in mid-August and like you hear the locusts going and the grass is all this tall, and to imagine what that's going to look like on November 2nd, when it really matters.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of clients that I had one, his name's John. He has property in Wisconsin. And that first year, he was a little bit of a doubter because I went out to him during the winter, designed his property. He had a ton of summer food. He got rid of it all. And so instead of seeing those batcher groups of 20 bucks on 400 acres, they're gone.
Yeah.
And he's seen occasional buck. He sees an occasional mature buck. But then he ended up seeing 20 some bucks during the rut. He had his best season. They shot 195 incher with a muzzleloader.
Wow.
They had some incredible hunts, and then he was a believer. But even to this day, I've been doing this for a long time. I first had my property in the mid 90s, UP property starting in 99, planting all fall food for the most part, not a lot of summer food. And even though I know they're going to be there, I know the dates are going to be there, they start coming back the approximate time. Certain bucks that I know made it, and I know they're going to be around on the property a lot. It's still, like you said, it gets into August and you're kind of like, you just have to think back to all the years. And this is with a ton of cell comes out, mock scrapes. So when they're on there, we know. Yeah. And when they're not, we know. And so it's, that's the thing people say, well, if you're not getting pictures of them, that doesn't mean they're not there. And boy, if they're on mock scrapes and they're on unpressured property, when they're there or not. It's not like they're just magically behind a tree.
Yeah.
You're going
Sometimes I wish they were.
It's funny. That's a funny point. I've gone back and forth with that, like the trail cameras. It's like I've seen bucks, maybe not intentionally or not,
skirt them.
They don't get everything.
Yeah,
they can't. They can't possibly. But I've also gotten to a point where I'm like, it's effective enough that if they're there, like within a reasonable amount of time, like we're going to know, we're going to find out.
Well, and I see what we're doing is most of my stands, obviously you're putting a tree stand in the area you expect a buck to move through during the fall, not in the summertime, not in the spring, not necessarily in the winter. So you're putting them on good cruising areas, good traveling benches, inside corners, funnels. And then because the stand's there, that's why I want a camera there. So most of my cameras are in front of tree stands. And then the reason that I have a camera there and I have a tree stand there is the reason I put a mock scrape there.
Yeah.
So I'm not, you guys know me, I'm just hanging a vine or I'm hanging a branch that they like to rub and scrape in the area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hanging it right on the trail that I expect to kill that buck on. And I'm putting it right in the water hole, right near the water hole. Just a lot of times I'm getting a picture of them both. So when a buck comes through, he could go around that mock scrape, but a lot of times it's right on the trail he should be walking on. That's why I have a stand and a camera there in the first place.
Yeah.
And so you should, most of the time, the bucks I'm shooting, I mean, I'd say that less than 5% or less are bucks that are unknowns.
Yeah.
You know what buck it is. 95% of the bucks you see, you have trail cam photos of. It's very defined. I've read Jeremy, probably some scientific studies that have talked about, I remember someone from the QDMA, they were talking about, 50% of your bucks should be randoms, or that's what the scientific, I don't know what the number is, but on highly defined properties, it should be very few.
100%.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, I'm in a complete agreement. I mean, very rarely have I hunted a property and seen and or killed a buck that I didn't know existed.
Right.
I mean, and I think when you hear stats like, well, you're going to hear these surprise bucks. First of all, you own 30 acres in a corridor along a river that you're not holding any bucks anyways, right? They're just cruising through type of thing. Sure. But I think those stats are just inaccurate.
I think food can affect that a lot too. Like if you have good food and maybe neighbors don't, late November through December can give you some surprise bucks.
In fact, that's where I would expect to see surprise bucks is in the late season if I'm containing food. In the rut, though, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll be the first guy to sit there with both fingers crossed, thinking, "Man, I hope something shows up because I don't have shit right now."
Yeah. You would be my dad in that case.
But in all honesty, nothing ever surprises me. It's just same old dude. I will say that I have. The only time that I have, and it's probably because I haven't done a ton of work, is my place in Kentucky that, I mean, I'm in literally next to Daniel Boone National Forest. It's just giant timber. And those deer, and even talking to some of the locals, are moving 3-4 miles during the rut. And, here I'm sitting on 75 acres and have access to. Yeah. So, I mean, I shot a buck 2 years ago that I had got a picture of and didn't even know it was him back in June. Had never seen that deer, and I killed him on November 12th or 13th, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just because the range that these deer are covering in these giant national forest timber is enormous. So for sure, you could see a buck that you've never, even though I run 20 cameras on that property, that I've only seen once or maybe never have seen simply because of the travel distance. But I think on most farms in the areas that we're discussing, what deer is coming through.
Yeah, those big, and I mean, they can't do studies on small properties for the most part.
No.
And I mean, so if you intensely manage it, so you have good habitat, good cover, just adequate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you really, the lowest hole in the bucket is how you hunt. And so if you're hunting poorly,
100%.
then you can see a lot of random bucks because they're not around very much.
Yeah, you're just bumping everything else off. I think Jared and I still to the point, and I had an experience. I've been hunting this 200-inch deer in Ohio, and I had probably a 150s 8-point come in. It wasn't downwind, but close enough to when the wind, it was an easterly that day, it sucked, but it eventually swirled back, and just watch his body language as that hits his face, and he turns, and he doesn't booger, but he just, I'm not going that way. Yeah. And that's in an open country situation. I think if every hunter thinks about the number of times their wind pulls down into a bottom and into a creek bed or whatever, how many big bucks you never really see because they've caught your wind 200, 300, 400 yards away, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not going up there."
That's a It's funny you say that. Did you notice, Jeff, on November 2nd? I don't know if it was the case where you were at, but I was dropping milkweed on the 1st and the 2nd. And my thermals, I assume, it seems like they're correlated with those cold fronts following a rain event. Even in the evening, sometimes you'll get that milkweed to rise, with the thermals rising that evening.
Yeah, just such a clean air.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be, I would say that's true too.
It's like those bluebird days, like the high pressure bluebird cold front
days. A little
days.
bit more forgiving, where that low pressure just sags it down.
Yeah.
What interesting, like those mature bucks, I think a lot of people, myself included, you don't realize how many you spook because of mature bucks just leave. They don't stand down there. So I had a video the other day, and Dylan and I were talking a lot about, to me, there's three types of deer. You have 1 sense deer, 2, and 3. And what I mean by that is like a fawn, or maybe even a 1.5-year-old buck, yearling buck. They're just not that wise. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they need all 3 senses, sight, 100%. Sound, and scent, to spook. Mature does a lot of times are 2 sense deer, where they'll see something out of place, but they circle downwind of you and then they take off. A mature buck is a 1 sense deer.
100%.
And you got to hunt them that way. If they hear you, smell you, or see you, they're gone. A lot of times you don't even know they were there because they heard you 150 yards away getting into your stand. They saw you with a little bit of movement. Imagine how far they can see you back in the hardwoods. You just move a hand a little bit, or you're silhouetted out against the tree or away from the tree. And then it's certainly if they smell you.
Yeah.
It's so amazing that we ever kill any of these things. Like when you think about how easy it is to get caught, it's...
Well, and again, let's take that time frame of Halloween to November 6th this year, which truly was the pinnacle of the season. I mean, I don't care if you're in Kansas or you're in Pennsylvania, like that was the week to be out there.
At the time seemed too good to be true. It's like, because those are the dates and you're like, is this really happening? Yeah. Is it happening now?
It is. It aligns so perfect. But you think about it, and I think it was probably somewhere towards the end of that 4th, 5th, 6th, something like that. Like I remember getting a lot of easterly winds, which were not opportune for any stand, but you're almost forced to I gotta go. Like if I don't do this now, I'm missing it. The opportunity's gone. And so you end up forcing some situations that aren't the best, and you probably, again, blow more bucks than you actually succeed with. Yeah. But it's because you've got this. This is it. This is the time. In October, it's like, I can be patient. I can wait. You get to that first week in November, and you got to go, because then the second week became 70 degrees through the Midwest.
Yeah. And last year was flipped. It was the last several days, 5 days, 7 days of October was great. I killed my buck on the 28th.
That's right.
Some of the guys from Matthews have a big giant lease around here. Pat Reeves was on that lease about, I don't know, it was 2,500 acres, something like that. And they're only like half mile down the road as part of that property. Well, there's 3 of them that killed right around that time, 27th, 28th, 29th.
Wow.
Where this year that was a little bit warmer. And then that cold front hit the 31st through the first several days. Last year, our opener, let's say, was the 5th or 6th of November for gun season in Minnesota. It was like 70 degrees that day. So that week was horrible. And so it really
good thing it's a half mile away from you. You can get there whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. That is. But it's so weather dependent around there. If you get a bad weather week, it's just and the good thing is it's usually a roller coaster. It's going to be bad the week, or it's going to be good the week before, week after a bad weather event. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's the. And again, it can happen at any given time, right? I mean, even during those 70-degree days, I've got pictures. In fact, I think that 8-point I was going to kill behind my house showed up at it's like 68 or 69 degrees at 1 o'clock in the afternoon cruising through.
Red Moon Day.
Well, and that's like,
I don't believe that shit.
Tonight, it's not like a great weather night. We have 30-mile-an-hour gusts, but I'm going hunting because I can hunt without spooking them, and I can go I have the time to go sit in the blind for a couple of hours.
At some point, you got to throw caution to the wind.
Yeah, and like tonight, there's no risk because I'm not going to spook anything by watching them, from a distance. And so that's a little bit different with gun versus bow too.
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting towards the end of this thing here. I need your help, Jeff, to make a decision on this family property of mine. We own it, so it's not going anywhere, and I'm never going to probably not hunt it altogether. But I am kind of at a decision point here where I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to put my time in the first 2 weeks of season when some of those summer bucks are still hanging around on an early season pattern, and then not hunt it in November because they're not there. Or I'm going to, invest in something that's going to keep them there in November. And then I can treat it more traditionally.
I would do that only because it seems like those early season hunts are a couple days and you get them or not.
Yep.
So it's not like you have, when you focus more on a pure fall parcel, then you have from mid-October, end of October through end of December, January, or depending on how long your food lasts. And so I think if you focus on that time frame, that's what I try to get for my clients. Like, I don't want my client to just have a pure rut parcel, because then that's what a lot of them are. They're like, man, if they don't see deer in that week or 9 days of the peak rut, they're not seeing deer. And that's probably due to sometimes the way they hunt, lack of quality food or lack of quality habitat, or all three. But you don't want that early season. Like, I wouldn't mind an early season property because it gives me something to look forward to. There's always a mature buck, know, somewhere.
Yeah.
But, there's one instead of 6 or 7 or, and that's all relative. It might be that someone is, thinking we're spoiled, but they're looking at, they're hoping to shoot that 1 3-year-old in the area.
Yeah.
And they have some 2-year-olds they're going to go after, but it's the same thing. It's all relative. It's like, you want to max out in November. So my choice would be, I'd rather see someone have a great property from mid-October to January.
Yeah.
Until the season's over or they run out of food, because then you can actually be the true herd influencer. You can't be a herd influencer for the first 2 weeks of September.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I mean, the one thing I've always focused on from a property standpoint, and it's not always going to work out, right, is literally you want to be like the head of a flower, right, where your property's that center and you've got all these petals that are essentially the home ranges of these bucks. Because, the average landowner is not going to own usually more than 100 acres, probably in most cases more than 70 acres. And so you're never going to hold that buck on your property, right? But you want him to have an overlap on your property. And then if you make it good, you essentially can keep, even though that might be his whole home range, if 80% of his time is on the piece that covers your property, then you've got a better chance to kill him. You just got to figure out how to do that. And every deer is different. To me, even with food and cover, pressure's number one. And we've seen that even in this Ohio lease we have. It's 400 acres of cover in the middle of pasture and ag country. I mean, literally, if you look at it from an aerial, you're like, that's where the bucks are. The dude is on his property riding around every day, multiple times a day. And so when we go in and say, or he asks like, hey, why aren't you guys hunting here? It's like, there's no deer. Like, they don't stay here because you're on the property just driving around all day, every day.
It's the lowest hole in the bucket.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's, what's even worse is like if like the property I have here, where we have 15.5 acres of food plots, I have cuttings, I have 10 acres of switchgrass, we have 6 water holes, tons of mock scrapes. We've done a lot to it, a lot of work in 2 years. But if I went out there and drove through the property and hunted it poorly, it even makes it worse, because now I'm attracting every deer in the neighborhood knows about this property. They like the habitat, and I just go out and spook them.
Yeah.
So I'm educating the entire neighborhood, where you're almost better off if you're going to hunt it poorly is just to do nothing to the land, because then the deer are none the wiser. You go out and sit on opening day. You go out and sit during the rut. You sit on and really that's true. I mean, there's a lot of good hunters too. It's almost like someone could pop into a property next to me right here, and if they're a good hunter, they wouldn't have to do much to their land. They just sit off to the side during the rut and take one of the bucks that comes through.
Yeah.
And then they're not educating the deer. They're just popping in, hunting the deer, none the wiser. They just, and that, so you kind of look at it, habitat can be a bad thing. Just because someone spends $20,000 a year on habitat doesn't mean that they're going to have a great property.
Yeah. Do you think you can over habitat, like the pressure?
Yes.
Like, can you outdo the pressure with good habitat?
No.
Yeah.
No, I think the more habitat you have, if it's being hunted poorly, the more it magnifies the problem.
I think in that same kind of breath, I've seen a lot of people go into a raw property and implant a ton of food, which in theory would make a great impact. But then from just being in the property or hunting the property or whatever, those deer are coming to those locations, as are the humans, and it didn't do anything.
Well, unfortunately, that probably plays into my question earlier too, is because what I can do is go and plant a bunch of switchgrass and I can create some serious thickets. What I can't do is, probably get our group of guys to hunt way less.
Yeah. And yeah, I see what you're saying. To me personally, I'd rather have the good habitat than not, just because you'll enjoy seeing pictures, even if they're at night.
Yeah.
I'd rather have it than not. I enjoy the habitat work just as much.
Sure.
And it's fun.
Sure.
Playing it all out. And then that's always a discussion for, you have that, try to get another little property somewhere else that you can hunt.
That's what I've done. That's where I killed that buck this year, actually, is like, yeah, I've kind of accepted it. It is what it is. And we can have fun with that. And I'll still do some work, but when it comes to killing
some of those family traditions, that's so much fun. I mean, that's part of hunting too. So,
well, that's what made killing my buck this year, Jeff, so special, was that everybody was in camp. Even my wife came up and we were hanging out, and I was able to like let them go and hunt, and I slipped away and I killed a giant on a property 5 miles away, and then got to bring it back. And fortunately, everybody was happy for me and stuff. But
well, I mean, it's been pressure. Up in the mountain, I've killed plenty of great deer on that place. I put a lot of work, a lot of money into that place. It's not mine. I just have permission on it, and I enjoy having it close. This year, they hunted the shit out of it, and I didn't see a mature deer since September 15th. Doesn't matter what I do.
And that can be really discouraging. And I almost, if it was my own choice, it's tough, because you can spend so much time and money on habitat improvements. And if it's just magnifying, I can give you so many examples of clients I go to, and that's such a predictable progression. You buy the land, you're so excited. The first year is your best, because again, the deer are none the wiser. You're just popping in, you try to hunt it well, and it could be good hunters. Then you put habitat improvements on it. You start over hunting the food plots, especially. You drive through the property, whatever it might be, and by year 7, you're frustrated. You're at a point where we need to make changes, or we need to sell the land.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
You're not getting what you want, and that's where you need to step back. And a lot of times, clients are hiring me, and you might have seen this, Jeremy, but clients hire you to go in and then make improvements on their land, but then you're looking at improvements to their hunting as much or more than the improvements you're making on the land. So once you have that structure of hunting, meaning how do you access the land? What are the hard access areas you can't change? What can you change? Are you willing to change them? Once you figure that structure out of access, then you can plan where the food plots are.
Yep.
And once you have the food structure down, then you can plan where bedding areas are and tree stands and locations.
Oh, dude.
Then you can put that all together. But a lot of people do it in, well, here's an open field. Let's put a food plot there.
100%.
Here's a cool spot for bedding. Let's put a bedding area there. But none of it helps you hunt it. It makes it worse.
At this point in your career, Jeff, does it seem way easier to create good deer habitat than to like create good deer hunters and good hunting habits?
It's a lot of it's crazy. A lot of them, what I do is I'll go, like, let's say on 80 acres, they'll have 14 tree stands or blinds. And so you set up the good habitat, create all that. And then I'm pretty strict with it. This number 1 is a morning stand. You can only hunt it with northerly winds. And we'll go through number 1 through 15. I actually number them on the drawing and I try to make it so methodical for them. And not everyone wants it like that, but I try to make it so methodical for them that they just look, okay, we have southeast winds. Here's the 5 stand locations for morning stands we can hunt. And then they just break it. So then to them, it's not.
But dude, that is so critical to the success, because here's the thing. I can have the best deer habitat. I could have a property that I feel like has the potential to produce Boone and Crockett deer year after year after year. If I hunt it incorrectly or I pressure it incorrectly, that property is effectively dead.
Yes.
It's dead.
And all the money they spent for it. So it's like
there is no success there at the end of the rainbow.
I have I won't even talk about this. Let's just say I have a large property by one of the spots where I hunt. And it's a sizable investment, millions of dollars. And it's driven through with ATVs.
Yep.
Where you can hear them going through. And I look at it like, maybe we could, close with this, but there's a lot of people that have 500 acres and they turn it into a 50-acre parcel as far as potential. There's other people that take 50 acres and turn it into 500 as far as potential. And if you're spooking out that property, it doesn't matter what you do to the habitat, you're diminishing the value of the property. So some people are taking to a $2 million property and it's got the potential of a $200,000 property or a $400,000 property. So my average client is 60 acres or less, 50% or 60 acres or less. I have them up to several hundred acres. I've been on 4,000 acre properties, 2,000. But I'd say my average client is around 100 acres. But I have a lot. I have 20 acre parcels, 30, 40. And the whole goal is to make that property a lot larger than it is. And part of that is how many neighborhood parks have you seen that are 30 acres?
Oh, yeah.
And there's owners that walk out of it every night. There's no food plots. There's nothing being done.
Yeah.
It's just they have diverse habitat. And it holds some incredible deer just because there's no pressure.
I think the hardest part for that, Jeff, and I get this as a landowner myself, is having to realize that you can't use your property as much as you thought you could.
Well, and I always tell people, as long as it's like my landowner in Wisconsin, we have an agreement where he'll stop going out there Labor Day.
Yep.
Season usually opens the second, third Saturday of September, and then he stays off it until after the deer season.
Yep.
So I look at it like, as long as you're managing those activities during the season, whatever, and think of it this way, the big buck shouldn't be on the land in July anyway.
Well, I was going to say, you're almost training that deer herd to use it during the time that you want them to use it and not use it during the times you don't really care if they use it.
Oh, we're shooting videos an average of once a week throughout the season or throughout the year. And in the off season, we're out on the land shooting at least half those.
Yep.
I mean, we're bringing a whiteboard, sometimes putting in the back of a side by side in a good spot because of the scenery, or we're standing next to a mock scrape, a tree stand location. We're putting up stand locations. We're cutting. So we're out on that property. We go for bike rides. We go for walks, side-by-side rides. I love ATVs and side-by-sides, just not during the season.
Yeah.
Except for picking up deer. I love picking up deer with a side-by-side instead of dragging.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Well, listen, man, we got to get you to Wisconsin this evening so you can actually, put all this talk to work and make something happen. So, but again, Jeff, appreciate you coming on. As always, man, just I feel like Jared and I could probably just continue to talk all the time, and there's so much still to kind of uncover and lift up rocks and see what's underneath. But
it's really nice to circle back, having talked to a bunch of people since we talked to you last. It's like I've had ideas about like, oh, I could do this, I could do that. On Jeremy's property, we could do this, and it's just really nice we really value your input on top of all of that to kind of weigh against.
It's fun talking to you guys too, because you guys are into this stuff. As much or more than a lot of other people.
Yeah. So
then we can get into some really cool in-depth stuff. So, some of it's more like, I like on my YouTube channel. I like when someone they'll say they've been hunting for 46 years and they got something out of the video. And then you have comments. I had comments this morning where the guy shot his first buck and, this is their first year hunting. Another guy, his name's Denny. He's from Ohio. This is his second year hunting and he shot a 10-point last night.
That's awesome.
So I get these same commenters all the time, and so when you see something like that, I love it. But the point is that I love it when you can talk in-depth stuff to help people, and then you have the basic stuff. And I think like talking to you guys, we get to cover it all. So
we're not afraid to ask stupid questions either. So we're all over the board.
Transparently, dude, just because I've been there, I don't know anybody in this industry right now that looks at more properties than Jeff Sturgis, thus then being able to literally look at practical examples and have a conversation on it. I mean, you see so many different properties a year and so many different situations that I really don't think there's anybody in the industry that could talk practically more than you right now.
Yeah. Well, even just a moment ago, Jeff, you pointed something that in my mind, and this happens probably a lot during our conversations, where I'm like, oh, like that's why that's happening. When you said, guys, you see a lot of guys, they buy a property and then the first year is like the best. And then because of more than likely pressure, gets steadily declines over years. I'm like, that's us.
Yeah.
100%. That's exactly what I've seen on our property.
But I would say it's the most common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most common route that people take because it's all, it's all, let's just do this habitat. And
well, you think you're doing good. You think I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to do TSI. I'm going to plant food plots. You think you keep or are improving things. you're not even thinking about the presence that you're creating or the situation you're creating that even when you hunt that
to death.
Yeah, you're gonna beat it into the ground.
Yeah.
It's tough, man.
Yeah. And it's, I fell into what I do. I tell that to anybody. And it's a luxury being able to see all those people a year, because you'd have to be an idiot not to learn something on every property if you just go into it with an open mind. So, someone else might have absorbed a lot more on all those properties I've been to, but even if you just absorb a little bit, you can learn something. And so that's why I like talking about it, because it's, I find a lot of clients will say, boy, you were really excited this morning about this location. Is this spot not as good? I'm like, I'm just tired. Because I do get excited. They'll notice that excitement, and they'll notice if it changes or something. But to me, I love this stuff. It's fun.
Well, they should take note if they see Jeff Sturgis excited about something on their property. It must be pretty damn good.
And if I'm not excited, it's probably because I'm just wore out from a 10 client trip in 11 days.
That's it,
Understandable.
Man. Well, listen, dude.
We talking to you guys. Always love talking to you guys.
We appreciate it. Hopefully, ATA happens this year, and we'll see you in Louisville in January. But
definitely, I'm planning on it.
Yep. Regardless, keep us updated. Good luck tonight. Be safe and enjoy the rest of the season.
Too.
Thanks, Jeff.
See you, buddy.
See you, man.
Great talking with you.
You too.
See you guys later.
Thanks, man.
Yep.
Man, just like that, we're into planning for 22.
Yeah.
Just you go into it and you're like, oh, well, let's see what Jeff did in November. And then next thing you know, you're like, man, I'm already thinking about 22.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a rolling progression. Man, those conversations are like...
It's probably tough for you to hear a little bit because of the situation you're in with the family farm.
It just confirms a lot. Ultimately, I think that it's pressure. Pressure is what's killing us.
No doubt in my mind. I mean, look at even Scott's here on the mountain. Like, for this area, it's a great property. It's dead this year.
Yeah, and it's taken me seeing it on a couple different properties, mine being one, Scott's being another, Ohio for you being a third. It's like, and it'll get there probably, unfortunately. Over time, like, that really takes a toll.
Dead.
Really takes a toll. And it's not just hunting pressure. It's just human presence during the hunting season.
Yep. Yeah, it's tough, man. I mean, it's one thing that I think that as all of us listen to this, whether it's a permission, a lease, our own, even public.
That public in Illinois, what an example of that. That's been getting pounded for years, and there are no deer there.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it from a habitat standpoint, because of the river corridor, soil quality, the thickness of it, I mean, in all point directions go to this is a big buck habitat producing area. And there are some.
And it would be.
But the fact that it just gets pounded and pounded and pounded from a public hunting standpoint, there are no deer over 2.5 years old in those blocks.
They're rare if they are there.
And if they are there, I have to imagine it's early in the year and or purely nocturnal from private to that public.
Right. They adapt. They figure out how to.
And will they make a mistake? For sure.
Yeah.
But if you're really banking on going in there and being like, I'm going to kill a mature buck in this block, odds aren't good. Too much pressure. And that's the number one killer. I mean, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if it's your farm, a lease, a public piece of ground. The habitat can be the best in the world, and that pressure will destroy that property's hunting potential.
Yeah.
And again, it's harder to. I'm one of the people like, man, when it's July, August, and people are posting big bucks, you're sending me bucks out in your, soybean fields. I'm like, man, this sucks, man. I'm not seeing shit yet. But ultimately, I'd rather not see them at that time and see them 2 months later.
Yeah.
And that's a big piece of this entire discussion. I mean, look at all the big bucks we saw in Illinois in these bean fields. We're like, well, there's 300 acres. This is all thousands of acres of field. It'll be gone. Those bucks will live in this block. They ain't there. They're gone.
Yeah, it's so hard to find like truly unpressured areas too. Just especially where there's, in states like Pennsylvania where, the average tract of land is much smaller than it would be in the Midwest. Every single piece of ground is getting hunted by somebody.
Well, and keep this in mind, and I know we did these in the same day, but if you're listening to this now, last week's podcast with Ben Rising, we discussed a very critical point, and it's no knock on them, but the fact that many of these states have now adopted crossbows as part of the archery season. It used to be that the pressure didn't happen until gun season. As long as you hunted that place before gun season, you were golden. Now, dead zone. The rut in Southern Illinois, Missouri, whatever, dead zone on public especially.
Yeah.
Because there is so much pressure happening by the enhancement of having crossbows in the archery season that property is beat to death prior to gun season. Never was like that. Even in a state like Ohio or Pennsylvania, same thing. All of a sudden, you've increased the amount of archery hunters that you have via crossbows. That pressure is destroying properties long before the gun hunters ever step foot on. It won't surprise me if over the next few years, gun hunters continue to decline because they're like, I ain't seeing shit. It's because all the pressure from the bow hunting sector weeks prior to them even getting a chance to step into the woods. Before crossbows, compound guys, yes, they hunted. But the pressure was very light because, frankly, if we put pressure on an area, we didn't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got an additional demographic in this crossbow sector that, frankly, a lot of these guys hunt like they're gun hunting.
It's huge, man. I'm curious what it is, but
I'm not opposed to. I'm not saying like
I know.
you shouldn't have crossbows. I'm just saying
that's what you said. So
I like them for my kids.
Dude, I'll bet it's more than compound bow hunters. I bet there's more crossbow.
Oh, 100%. And it's the way that you hunt.
You think?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the way that you hunt. You hunt crossbows like you gun hunt. There are very few people. I'm not saying there's none, because there definitely are people who have shoulder injuries, people who are getting older, kids that are hunting with adults who understand archery hunting. Most people hunting with a crossbow hunt like they're gun hunting. There were plenty of people we talked to at the sandwich shop that shot their damn deer off the ground, sitting against a tree, and he walked onto a trail.
Sure.
Most compound bow guys don't do that.
Right.
The amount of pressure that is put on via that style of hunting, and people can crucify us if they want, is detrimental to the herd itself, as well as, frankly, is going to screw up the opportunity for anybody to be successful during gun season 2 weeks later.
Yeah. I think the outcome is, where the discussion is at. Like there's no question that like a crossbow is a more lethal weapon in terms
more
of
efficient
in terms of range and all that
skill level.
But it absolutely is a different thing. There is no discussion there. The question is like, how does it affect deer and deer seasons, and should it be allowed exactly in the same way as crossbow?
I look at it this way, and it's I'll even take my kids, for example. If I'm going in to bow hunt, I've got a very clean path. I know how I'm approaching. I'm usually in an elevated stand, and I'm playing the wind because I'm looking to get that deer within 30 yards. If I take my kids with a crossbow, I'm probably taking a much easier pathway to get to my stand. I'm typically at ground level. I'm not in a tree stand. And I can probably shoot effectively out to 50-plus yards. So just that slight change in my approach and technique of hunting will absolutely put more pressure than me elevated in a stand by myself.
Yeah. And that's not everybody. I'd hate for that to be a generalization of all crossbow hunters, because
I don't think it is. I'm just saying it could be 1 in every 10. That one person hunting like a gun hunter with a crossbow will negatively affect the rest of the 9 hunters.
Probably.
Versus how many guys are walking around with a compound bow stalking through the woods trying to shoot?
Sure.
Not many. Some, but not many.
Well, maybe that's an interesting point. It does give some undue confidence. You're like, oh, well, I can just walk in here and sit on a log, and yeah, you probably can shoot that deer at 90 yards.
Plenty of people we talk to in Illinois do it. I know that there's several in Kansas that have done it.
That's interesting. So whether they do it or not, crossbows do allow for sloppier hunting habits,
which leads to heavier deer pressure.
There's no doubt about that. Rifle being allowing for the sloppiest of most. I can go and sit right where I can just trounce in there and crush a 30 pack and then shoot a deer a mile away.
Well, and listen to the streaming complaints over the last 4 or 5 years, especially of no deer, no deer, no deer. Maybe it's not because there's less deer in an area or those people are sloppier hunters. In fact, that it's just been an increase in pressure from the bow season with the allowance of crossbows just liberal.
Yeah, I could see that.
Up for debate.
It's interesting.
Here's Jared's phone number. Call him if you want to debate him.
Yeah. You're the one that said crossbow hunters are sloppy.
You're the one who said you didn't want any more hunters, period.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, we appreciate everyone listening to this episode of HUNTR Podcast with Jeff Sturgis. Always awesome to have Jeff on. Definitely check out his new whitetail habitat solutions. I know he's got more courses coming out. Obviously, he's got a rapidly growing YouTube channel and tons of information there. We'll probably make sure we snag Jeff at ATA.
Yeah. We'll get together with Jeff before next year's season, I think. We should try to.
Yeah, I told him about the new Ohio farm. I'm hoping he can sling a couple trips to us.
Sweet.
So we'll grab them. But anyways, we appreciate you listening. And if it's almost Christmas, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. It's also almost Thanksgiving for us. I got to fill a damn tag soon.
Better get after him.
Got a bunch of them.
Later.
Take me